Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Hope everyone has had a nice, brisk evening. It's finally cooling off. Thank you guys for joining us this morning. So it looks like participants are still trickling in. There's about 116 of you. So we will likely get up to about 200 to 300 people. I think that's how many have registered. So uh, this is our final session of the CALPADS Special Education Data Roadshow. And we will be recording this session and it will be posted on the CSIS YouTube channel. So we've got to have the transcription cleaned up. And as soon as that happens, we will get that posted as quickly as possible. So next slide, please. All right, so a lot of the content that I'm going to cover here today is pretty detailed. And for anybody that is new out there, sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. So please, if you have questions, send in a CalPADS support ticket. We are now at the 14th of November. As I will talk about later, our deadlines are a little bit earlier this year for some of the data that we will be using for disproportionality. So therefore, if you're having issues or trouble, please reach out as soon as possible rather than waiting until the very last moment to go ahead and send in a support ticket, because we want everybody to get across the finish line. Also, if you have not subscribed to our SPED data support listserv, you can send an email to subscribe-calpads-sped-support at mlist.cde.ca.gov, and that will automatically subscribe you to the SPED data support listserv, and you get all of the latest and greatest with special education data in CalPADS, as well as all of the other special education data collections that we administer. Next slide. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go over what's new for Fall 1. We're going to talk about some local special education data system audits that you should be doing in your local IEP systems. We're going to go over the CalPADS data submission and report reviews. Then we're going to talk about the state performance plan and annual performance report indicators that use Fall 1 data that you need to be mindful of. Then we're also going to talk about the data for the annual determination letter and monitoring reports and holding timely meetings. Finally, we're going to cover just a couple of things to look forward to for the 25-26 academic year. Here is the CDE box link for the slide deck and materials. So hopefully all of you have received this, but Dominic just posted it into the chat. So this link will take you to our CDE box site. Some of you may get a message that says, sign up for an account while you're waiting for your documents to download. It is not necessary to sign up for a box account. Just be aware of that. You just need to wait for the documents to download, and then your documents will be available in your downloads folder on your laptop or PC. Also, please feel free to ask questions throughout the duration of this presentation. We have our DEA staff, the Special Education Data Evaluation and Analysis Unit staff, manning the chat. And are we requesting that they use the Q&A? Yes, Dominic? You're on mute.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's the best way to go.
Okay, so put your questions in the question and answer box rather than putting them in the chat, because we won't be monitoring the chat. If you have general comments or you want to talk to your colleagues, feel free to put that in the chat, but reserve the Q&A for questions only, please. Next slide. All right, here's a slide with all of the acronyms that we're going to cover in this presentation today. I'm not going to go over all of them, but we put this in here just as a reference so that in case I use an acronym that you're not familiar with, please feel free to come back to this slide as a reference so that you understand what I'm talking about. Although I do try to kind of stick to saying what it actually is rather than using the acronym, or I do it in addition to. Right, Fall 1 training. The Fall 1 trainings that CSIS offers have concluded. But we just put this slide in here to kind of let all of you special education data coordinators know that even if you do not have a bridge account, you can actually attend the instructor-led trainings that CSIS offers, as long as the CALPADS administrator in your LEA lets you use their bridge account. So you can absolutely do that. All right, so we're going to go over some things that are new this fall one. So we did make some changes to our code sets. The first changes were in the disability category code set. So 220, hard of hearing / hearing impairment, we actually added the verbiage hearing impairment. And you'll notice in 230, deafness, we actually removed hearing impairment. This was not a change in legislation. This was just correction of a typo that had been in the CalPADS code sets apparently since 2019-20. So we did fix it. Then the next one is actually due to a change in legislation. So emotional disturbance legislation specifically changed all references of emotional disturbance to emotional disability. Meeting delay codes. So we retired code 75, temporary school closure, and we actually added that verbiage to code 60. So now code 60 is a combination of both school emergency or temporary school closure. The other thing that I wanted to point out is over the last couple of years, LEAs have asked that we sort of clarify the use of meeting delay codes. And so over the last year, we've worked to develop comprehensive definitions for all of these meeting delays. And you'll notice if you look in the CalPADS code sets and you look in the definition of each of those codes, it tells you which types of meetings those codes are appropriate for. And most notably, it also says when they are not appropriate. So my suggestion for those of you special education data coordinators that are responsible for populating meeting delays, that you actually print that section of the code set out and hang it by your computer as you're populating those meeting delay codes. Okay, the next set of changes have to do with our special education non-participation reasons. Now, special education non-participation reasons is not a term that you will see in your IEP systems. You actually know these particular codes as either plan types 700, 800, and 900, or special education exits. Okay, so special education non-participation reason is actually a combination of both of those things in your IEP systems. 24 withdrawal was a code that we had last year, and we did retire it at the beginning of this year, and we replaced it with two new codes, 28 and 29. So the reason that we did this was because what became evident is that LEAs were using the 24 withdrawal code for two scenarios. So the first is when there's actual parent revocation. So the parent sends in writing an indication that they want to remove their child from special education, or an adult age student with disabilities wants to revoke consent for the provision of special education services. So revocation means they are no longer eligible. To re-enter special education, it would require a subsequent initial evaluation. The second scenario that you were using it for is when students were eligible for special education, but they were not coming for services. So at a certain point, after a certain period of time, LEAs were withdrawing them and they were using code 24. However, in those cases, there was no explicit parent revocation. There was a cessation of service, but there wasn't any parent revocation. So technically, the student is still eligible, but there was a cessation of service without revocation. Now, the distinction between codes 28 and 29, again, is 28 actually requires a subsequent initial evaluation if the student wants to re-enter special education. 29, cessation of service without revocation, the student actually continues to be eligible. Therefore, depending on the amount of time that they have not had services, you would do either an annual plan review or an eligibility reevaluation, okay, depending on the amount of time that they've been without services. Now, having said that, we are now collecting those two things explicitly. And so it should be evident when students transfer to other districts, when there's actually been explicit revocation. But now that we're collecting code 29, just so you know, that's a piece of information that we've never collected before. And we will have to take a look at the data that is resulting this year and how many districts are actually reporting that students are eligible, but there's a cessation of service. That typically happens in two cases. You have preschool students that are not attending preschool programs at your district. They're there for speech only, and the parent signs the IEP, but then never brings a student for services and they can't be contacted. The other scenario is when a student's on an IEP at a public school, and then the parent removes them, takes them to a private school, but will not revoke consent for special education and does not want services through an individualized service plan at a private school. So just be aware that there's a distinction. Now, code 27 is a new code that we added, and it is not eligible, no consent for initial provision of special education and services. And so some of you may be asking, when would we actually see this code? And keep in mind, all of these codes are generated based on selections that you're making in your IEP systems. You don't explicitly select a code 27, let's say in SEIS. Now, code 27 happened after discussions with certain CELPAs and our legal team. And so what I want you to do is think about the IEP process in terms of being a 3-step process. So step 1, you have to receive parental consent for evaluation in order to assess the student for special education. Once the student's been assessed, and if the student meets the eligibility criteria, then the parent has to consent to the initial provision of special education services. They have to say, yes, I want my child in special education. And then the third step is that the parent would have to agree to all or part of the offer of free and appropriate public education, which is the offer of FAPE. Okay, so it's a 3-step process. Consent for evaluation, consent for the initial provision of services, and agreement to all or part of the offer of FAPE. This second step occurs when parents go through the assessment process but do not agree with that eligibility determination. And they say, no, I don't want my child in special education. So at that point, the offer of FAPE doesn't even come into play. So if they say, no, I don't want my child in special education, the student is not eligible. Therefore, if they change their mind a year later, in order to re-enter, the districts would actually have to reassess. You'd have to do a subsequent initial evaluation. Okay. We also added new code 30, no longer eligible. And there are 2 scenarios in which you should see this code within CALPADS. And the first is when a student is reevaluated in their triennial reevaluation and is determined to be no longer eligible. And then the second is when students earn a standard high school diploma. They earn a standard high school diploma. They were eligible, but they are no longer eligible once they earn that standard high school diploma. Finally, we did update all of the special education program setting definitions. So many of those definitions have been updated to indicate which age groups they are appropriate for. So as we stand here today, and as we've been going through Fall 1, there have been some changes. So we will be updating some of these definitions to align with our validations. Next slide, please. Okay, so disproportionality is when a district, or it's a measurement, and it's required by the US Department of Education. So we are required to monitor disproportionality. It's typically when a district is over identifying particular race ethnicity groups or primary disability groups as students with disabilities. Additionally, it's when certain race ethnicities within the districts have been disciplined more often. The current year data, which is, and there's three components, so I want you to pay really close attention to this. So for fall, the three components that we use to calculate disproportionality are race ethnicity of the student. Second is their primary disability. The third is their program setting. Okay. So those are the three components that you need to make sure are absolutely correct and have integrity, because it's used for our state performance plan, or SPP, indicators 9 and 10, which is disproportionality overall and disproportionality by primary disability. The reason I'm telling you this is because we've shortened the timeline, right? We are going to harvest those data from CALPADS on the initial certification deadline, which is December 13th. Typically, we give you through the amendment window. We are not going to do that this year. We have to harvest those data on December 13th because we want to get the annual determination letters out sooner. So again, we are using current year data to calculate disproportionality. You must minimally get to LEA approval, but we are highly recommending that your CELPAs have an opportunity to review it and approve it. Because once you certify on December 13th, then we are going to use those data for your disproportionality calculations, which will appear in your annual determination letters, which we plan on sending out in February. So we will go over this in a little more detail later in the presentation. Right, so we also had a change in guidance for plan adoption for short-term enrollments at county offices of education. So last year, we put forth some guidance, and we were trying to help county offices of education and their students' districts of residence. So if students came to a county office of education and they were there for 1 to 10 days, we said, you know what, county offices, you don't actually have to adopt their plans. That way, when the students return to the districts of residence, the districts of residence already own the most recent IEP. Well, that had unintended consequences, because when we were actually calculating the data for cumulative enrollment, okay, cumulative enrollment is done during the end of year, and it looks at enrollments from July 1 until June 30th of the academic year. Well, for those short-term enrollments at county offices of education, because we asked them, or we told them they didn't have to submit up a plan record, it looks like the student is not a student with disabilities during those really short periods of time. And for cumulative enrollment purposes, it matters. Therefore, we reversed our guidance. So now, county offices of education, regardless of how long the enrollment is, you need to adopt the plan. And then when they return to the district of residence, the district of residence should re-adopt the plan with a new plan effective start date equal to the date that they returned to the district of residence. Next slide. All right, so pending meet records are important for two reasons. First, when you receive parental consent for initial evaluation, it is important to send up a meet record with a pending as of date saying that this initial evaluation is scheduled, and that parent consent date starts the 60-day timeline. So that's the first reason. Second reason is when an annual plan review or a triennial reevaluation now has become late. You want to be proactive and you want to say, hey, CDE, here is a pending meet record, our triennial hasn't been held, and you indicate a delay code of why it hasn't been held. That is really important for timeline compliance. However, we had to kind of change the rules because many of you were populating a pending as of date in the future. So we no longer allow that. The pending as of date actually has to be on the current date or prior to the current date when you're sending up those records. And that's because many of you were actually populating the pending as of date with the projected meeting date. So we don't want you to do that anymore. And I actually believe that in SEIS, they automatically populate it with the current date. Okay, so you want to make sure you get up those pending records, but you should always use a date as of the current date or prior. Next slide. Okay, so the next few slides are new and modified validations. And so I am not going to go through every single one of these validations, but what I did want to point out is that many of these validations, these new validations and modified validations, will be triggering based on the student's age as of census day. And this is a change from last year. Last year, in Fall 1, you only got these errors if the student's age and the data in that record did not correspond with the plan effective start date, right? So student's age based on the plan of effective start date, if it was correct and all the data, the corresponding data matched the student age, you were good. Now we're actually looking at the student's age on census day. So for example, if the student was 15 last year when they had their plan, and on the plan effective start date, they were 15 and they didn't need all of the transition indicators in their IEP, you would not have gotten an error. However, now the student as of census day is 16. So therefore, the student's 16 years old and requires the transition indicators. If there are blanks in there, then you're going to start getting errors because now the student is 16 as of census day. So a lot of you may have been experiencing a lot of those errors. We just want to make you aware that that was a change that we needed to ensure that the data that you're submitting and certifying is a reflection of the student's plan as of census day, their program settings as of census day. So many of you have probably had to make amendments as a result of this. Okay, scroll through the validation slides. Okay, degree of support. So degree of support is a data element that the Commission on Teacher Credentialing asked the Department of Education to collect. It's being collected because the Commission on Teacher Credentialing issued 2 new authorizations, an extensive needs authorization and a mild moderate support needs authorization for teachers that are providing instruction to students with disabilities in special education settings. So students that are in special day classes where all of the students are students with disabilities and the curriculum was designed for students with disabilities, that is a special education setting. So in order to determine whether or not a teacher is appropriately assigned in one of these special education settings, according to the students that they are providing that instruction to, we actually have to collect the degree of support. Now, it is not a required data element this year. You will notice you have probably not been getting any errors at the CALPADS level for populating degree of support. However, we are asking that all of you make sure that you populate the degree of support during one of the triggering events for that student. So if you're doing an annual plan review, if you're doing a triennial reevaluation, you're holding an amendment, an initial evaluation, and the student has one of the appropriate primary or secondary disabilities, we want you to make sure that that field is populated. And I believe SEIS implemented a validation where you actually are required to populate this for every single student. However, if it's not a student with one of the appropriate primary or secondary disabilities, you would just select the NA option. Now, how do you determine this? the degree of support is something that has to be locally determined by a team of people, but it's not part of the official IEP document, right? It's in the student data section. So we worked with SELPA to come up with some guidance, a set of frequently asked questions, as well as a set of guiding questions to help you identify the support need for each student with one of these primary or secondary disabilities. The link to that document is down at the bottom, and it is also available within the meeting materials link that we provided earlier and has been posted in the chat. So please feel free to take a look at that document if as you are identifying the degree of support for students. Now, one of the topics that's come up during this discussion is that the extensive support needs authorization statement essentially says the teacher provides intensive support and instruction. Unfortunately, there is nothing in statute, there is nothing in regs that clearly defines what we mean by intensive. And in order to clarify that, it's probably going to take a legislative fix. So in the interim, you will have to make local determinations about what you feel is intensive support and whether or not the student requires intensive support. Next slide. All right, school completion status 102. This is a new school completion status that we added to CALPADS specifically for students with disabilities that earn an alternative pathway diploma. So first of all, the student has to be eligible, which means they have to have significant cognitive disabilities and they have to be eligible for the alternate assessments. That student also has to complete a alternative pathway of courses that equate to the standards for a standard high school diploma, the state graduation minimum requirements. Okay, and then the district has to exempt the student from meeting the local graduation requirements. Now, the reason we bring this up is because the legislation changed. So last year when we implemented this code, we had a validation in place in CALPADS that only allowed the use of this code for any student who was in 9th grade in the 22-23 academic year. However, the legislation did change in June of this year, or June or July, or June 30th actually. And now this code can be used for any student who was in 9th, 10th, 11th, or 12th grade as of the 22-23 academic year. Okay, so you may have students that are now 12th graders that were in 11th or 10th grade in the 22-23 academic year. If they've met these criteria, you potentially could exit those students this year with a completion status of 102. The reason this is important is because this particular completion status code is used and counted as a graduate for purposes of the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate and the 5-year grad rate, which is calculated and published on the California school dashboard and reported to the federal government. However, for those of you that are familiar with the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report Indicator 1, which is a federal indicator that the Office of Special Education Programs requires us to collect. So it's the percentage of students with disabilities that are graduates. They received a standard high school diploma. This does not count towards Indicator 1. But again, it does count towards your 4- and 5-year adjusted cohort graduation rate that is displayed on the California school dashboard. Next slide. Okay, so before Dominic takes you through some of the local auditing, I kind of wanted to take a step back because one of the things that I learned, I was in the CALPADS office for about 15 years, and we always collected data for students with disabilities, right? And I thought I had a pretty good understanding of what they used it for. And then I actually moved over to the special education division and I figured out, I didn't know, I didn't know a tenth about what the data are used for. So I kind of wanted to make sure that all of you special education data coordinators are aware of exactly what the data are used for. So we do use it for federal reporting in the EDFAC system. So the EDFAC system is the federal equivalent of CALPADS, right? So we have to report data, fall data in particular, related to the child count, the number of students with disabilities that are actively receiving services. And then we also have to report out on least restrictive environment. So what percentage of your kids are in particular settings. Then we also use fall data for the annual determination letter. And one of the things that became really evident to me when we first started doing all of these roadshows is that many of you special education data coordinators have never even seen the annual determination letter. The annual determination letter is a letter that the Department of Education sends out typically in the spring every year. And the majority of the data that's in the annual determination letter comes from the prior year. But there are certain components of current year data that are in the annual determination letter. And specifically, it's the data that I talked about that's used to calculate disproportionality, which is race ethnicity information, primary disability, and program setting. It is very, very important that you actually ask your special education director or your SELPA director to see your annual determination letter, because then you will understand why they're coming back a year later and saying, hey, where did all these students come from in this particular calculation for disproportionality? What does the denominator represent? What does the numerator represent? Many of those data get certified in fall, and you have to make sure that they're correct because there's no opportunity to fix it once you've been identified as disproportionate. Okay, we also use the fall one data and prior year data to calculate the state level annual performance report. And essentially, that is California's report card to the Office of Special Education Programs. It's how are we doing as a state in 14 areas of data, and you will hear me refer to them as indicators. So how are we doing? Fall data, we're capturing data for indicators 5 and 6. So indicator 5 is school age least restrictive environment, and indicator 6 is preschool least restrictive environment. So we have a state level report card. Now, more importantly, you also have a local level annual performance report. And again, many special education data coordinators have never seen this. So if you want to take a look to see how your district is doing, you would click on this link. And actually, I'm going to have Dominic click on the link and open an annual performance report. I would strongly encourage all of you to take a look at your annual performance report because it is your district's report card. How is your district doing in these 14 areas of data? Okay, so you'll notice that we've got links, there are Word documents, and there are documents for LEAs beginning with AB, so they're in alphabetical order. So once he opens this Word document, what you're going to see is for each LEA, it's going to outline all of those 14 areas of data. It'll tell you exactly what we are measuring. It will give an indication of the district's status, what percentage the district has. It'll also give you an indication of what the target is. I know it takes a while to open because it's a really large Word document. And it'll tell you whether or not your district actually met the target. One of the things that you'll notice also just by looking at the web page here is that the annual performance report data that's displayed here is actually from 22-23. Okay, so we haven't even posted the 23-24 annual performance report. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So this is ABC Unified, and you'll see the indicator number all the way in the left-hand column. Okay, so indicator 1, 2, and then some of them actually have multiple parts. So they measure assessments. If you look at the very bottom, those are the data that are being pulled from fall. So you'll see 5A, B, and C, and 6A, B, and C. We're measuring least restrictive environment, school age, least restrictive environment, preschool. It'll tell you the district status. The target percentage is in the second to last column and whether or not the district met that target. So I can tell you, based on having worked with districts over the last year, that oftentimes when districts don't meet the target, it sometimes is not because they didn't actually meet the target. It's because the data they certified were incorrect. Okay, that's why I'm telling you these are things that you have to pay attention to in fall of this year, because if you don't, you're going to see it next year on the annual performance report, because these are lag data. Okay, and in the annual determination letters. Okay, a lot of the data that we use for the annual determinations comes from the prior year. So it is very important, in particular, to pay attention to the indicators 5 and 6, 9 and 10, to make sure that the data, underlying data, are accurate, so that when we pull it for the APR or the annual determination letter, you're not caught off guard. And if you didn't meet your target, it's because there's probably systemic issues within your district as to why you didn't meet that target. Okay, so we just want to make sure that you guys are certifying accurate data. All right, so now Dominic's going to take over and he's going to walk you through some of the things that you need to be doing in your local IEP system.
Thank you, Brandy. So just to talk a little bit about Fall 1, the sort of three-phase process to the Fall 1 reporting window. First step, it would be to audit your local special education data system, which is, SEIS or SIRAS, Welligent. Look for issues with your data there. Once you've audited that data and everything is posted to CALPADS, then you would want to work through your data discrepancies and make sure, going through all the work to get those resolved. And then once you have your data discrepancies corrected and everything's ready to go, reviewing your certification reports and the supporting reports. Okay, come on. All right, so local special education data system checklist. I'm not going to go through this entire thing, but it's a good jumpstart on your local system audit. Going through each of these items on a regular basis is going to make your life a lot easier for the Fall 1 reporting window, and really this would apply to end of year in a lot of ways as well. So something you can maybe print out, keep on your desk, or whatever is useful for you. First step, one of the most important steps, is affirming your IEPs, saving your IEPs, locking, archiving, whatever the process is in your special education data system. I know for a fact, because I worked for 8 years at Fresno County SELPA, that case managers don't always like to affirm their IEPs and amendments. Some of the reasons might be that they're not sure that they should do it if the parent hasn't signed in consent, or they're just haven't got around to finalizing some notes. Whatever the case may be, an unaffirmed IEP or unaffirmed amendment it's akin to doing your homework, writing your term paper, and then just never turning it in. So we strongly urge everybody to get those IEPs and amendments affirmed, archived, locked, saved, whatever, within a few days of the meeting. Now, I know that SEIS will not, or strongly recommends against affirming initial IEPs without that parent consent. And so in those situations, what you may need to do if the timeline is ticking and you're still working through finalizing that with the parent and getting their consent for the plan, is to add the meeting record to CALPADS in online maintenance. And you can do that for the meeting, even if it has not yet been affirmed or if the parent has not yet consented to the plan, because essentially all you're doing is reporting that this meeting took place. I know SEIS has a homepage notification under, I think, CALPADS alerts right there on the homepage, right in the center, that shows you how many unaffirmed IEPs and unaffirmed amendments that are currently remaining for your district or for yourself, whatever access level you have. You want to make sure that any of those meetings or amendments that occurred on or prior to Census Day, October 2nd, is 0. And again, just be sure to reinforce the idea with your case managers that meetings need to be affirmed as soon as possible, ideally the same day. Review your students that are marked do not report. So if you're going through the reporting process and you have a transaction that is tripping up your report, maybe there is a known issue with CALPADS and it's not something that you can fix the data on your end and you have to wait for that resolution, you mark the transaction do not report and you continue on with the rest of the work. Make sure you go back and address those transactions that you've marked do not report. If it's a reportable transaction, meaning that it was a transaction for an event that occurred between July 1st of this year and October 2nd, Census Day, then you need to make sure that that information gets posted to CALPADS in some fashion, whether it is going through and resolving any errors that you have, or if there's something preventing that, using online maintenance to add the information to CALPADS manually. But either way, you need to make sure that every transaction for a reportable event that has taken place in the school year up to and including Census Day is posted to CALPADS. Make sure your students are properly exited from special education. I worked on a ticket probably a month and a half ago now at this point, where a student had exited special education in December of 2023, and the case manager submitted the request in SEIS to process the exit in August of 2024. So that's bad news all around. So make sure that when a student is exiting special education, that the case manager inputs all the required information, exit date, exit reason, submits that request if that's how your special education data system works, and that exit is actually posted to CALPADS. Missing data like missing exits are one of the key reasons that students end up on annual determination letters because they should not have been reported as eligible and participate any longer. But for some reason, that exit just did not get processed at the local level at all. So be sure that your students are being properly exited from SPED in the data system, and that is reflected in posted data to CALPADS. Reviewing your SSID and local ID fields, make sure they're both populated in your special education data system for all of your students. You won't be able to post the file to CALPADS. It will give you an error on submission if that data is missing. Some vendors may have custom queries you can run to check for this information. In SEIS, you could just create a new search and add columns for SSID and local ID, and then look for the blanks. You also need to make sure that there is an enrollment in your student information system for the student that will reflect that you have ownership of this student's record. Otherwise, you're going to get the GRR 5. And it's GRR because it's very frustrating to deal with. Transition services. So Brandy spoke earlier about validations being adjusted to reflect Census Day data. And so in this situation, every student that is 16 years of age or older on Census Day, not when the plan was developed, the plan effective start date, but on Census Day, must have those 8 transition questions answered. They don't necessarily have to be in the affirmative, but they just need to be answered. And there should be transition services on the IEP as well. these fields cannot be blank if the student is 16 on census day. Additionally, if any of those indicators were answered no in error, that has to be fixed with an amendment. But going back to the records or the fields being blank on on census day, perhaps you've adopted a plan for a student that transferred in, and that plan was developed when the student was 15. They've since turned 16, and we're 16 years old on census day. That plan is going to trigger these validations. What you can do is edit the plan in Calp if you're unable to post an amendment or a subsequent transaction to answer these questions. You can use online maintenance in CALPADS to edit the plan record that's effective on census day and simply mark no for all of these transition questions. I'll discuss this more a little bit later because this is one of the more frequently occurring errors, data discrepancies that we are dealing with for Fall 1. Additionally, you should be and can be proactive identifying students who will need those transition meetings. Their 16th birthday is approaching. You can look for that and search for that at the SELPA or district level. And you should also ask your case managers to go through their caseloads and make sure that they're aware of students that are turning 16 and will need these questions answered. Now, at the beginning, I said that they don't need to be answered in the affirmative. However, one of the performance plan indicators that Brandy spoke about earlier is indicator 13. And for that indicator, it's expected that all of those questions are answered yes. For census day, you're just trying to get past those Plan 390 to Plan 397 F1 errors when you're indicating that you're marking no on these. At the end of the year, whatever is in effect is going to be what is used for your indicators. And so you definitely want to make sure that at some point there is either a plan review or an amendment that addresses these questions and ideally addresses them with a yes, because that is what's going to be measured in that indicator. General education participation percentage. It's the percent of time the student is in a general education classroom. You want to review this because this is also part of least restrictive environment, and you want to make sure that the values are accurate. So if you have, for example, a student that is a speech-only student, but they are reported as being in the regular class only 10% of the time, that's probably not accurate. And what we have seen most often is that those values get transposed. So the case manager meant to indicate that the student was in regular class 90% of the time, but they actually indicated the student is in only 10%. We also find that these sorts of transposition mistakes often happen more than once for the same case manager. It just may be a part of their process or the way they understand it that is causing them to transpose those values. So when you find something that doesn't look right based on their program setting or whatever else on their plan would make it seem like their general education participation percentage is incorrect, you want to get that figured out and also look at the values for other students that case manager works with to make sure that those values are accurate as well. Preschool to kindergarten transitions. Identify preschoolers that are transitioning into kindergarten or TK and figure out dates for when amendments to the program settings will need to be created when the student turns 5, because when a student is in TK or kindergarten and they're 5 years old, they can no longer be in an early childhood program setting. That program setting needs to be updated to a school age program setting, and the general education participation percentage has to be reported for these students as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about this later as well, but you can get a jump start by identifying your preschoolers that are going to be making that transition and calendaring dates for when those changes need to be made. You can monitor your program setting values in your special education data system. For instance, here in SEIS, you can use the built-in search under searches and SEIS searches, program setting 5 to 22 at the bottom. That's going to bring up the SEIS created search that looks that they have created for monitoring these values. You can also create your own search with your own criteria and columns. As I've shown here, that would get you the information that you need as well. SEIS also has homepage notices for program settings, but these only appear in these CALPADS alerts if a program setting was projected in the IEP. So on the educational setting offer a FATE page, under the section where the case manager or the IEP team indicates the program setting and general participation percentage for the student, it has this question shown on the screen: will the student's program setting change? And the IEP team can forecast that, indicating yes, and put in a date that they anticipate the change taking place and the new program setting. But what's important to note is this only creates a reminder. This does not create an amendment. It does not create a new plan record. It does not update anything in the future IEP or in the student record that will make this change for you. This change has to be done with an amendment or a plan review. So just be aware that having these alerts and having this information in the IEP in SEIS does not actually create the data that needs to be posted to CALPADS in order to reflect that change in setting. In SIRAS, they've been kind enough to provide some slides here for us. I unfortunately don't have any direct experience with SIRAS, so I can't really go through these slides with any sort of knowledge or additional information, but they have provided these here for our SIRAS users for your reference. So please be sure to look through these as you're going through your data cleanup process, your data audits in SIRAS.
Dominic, there was
Yes.
we have a question that I want you to answer live.
Okay.
From Ada. So she says, I had about 10 program setting changes projected for the first day of school that never showed up in this alert section. Thoughts?
That's interesting. Without seeing the student record, I wouldn't really have a guess. It sounds like that should not be the case. And there's a comment that they fall off of the alerts. I don't know if something has changed. I doubt something has changed. And it's also been commented that many don't show up, but most do. So that's kind of strange. I would recommend reaching out to SEIS in this situation, especially if you're looking at the future IEP and you see that a program setting was projected, that information is there, and it's just not creating that homepage notice for you. Reach out to SEIS and hopefully they'll be able to find something. But it sounds like if more than one. I did
hear one district at a session last week that basically said that it might be dependent on whether or not the parents actually signed the plan. So you might want to just check that, because it's possible that the projected setting is not showing up because you don't have parent signature.
That makes a lot of sense.
But I don't know. Check with SEIS, definitely.
Right. Yes. No, thanks, Brandy. That actually makes sense. Okay, so your students, check data for your students in your NPS schools. Make sure that the data for your students in NPS placements reflect the accurate school of attendance, primary residence, percent of time in general education, program setting, service provider, and service location. Review your pending meeting types. Make sure that pending transactions are submitted for any student that received parental consent for initial evaluation who is pending initial evaluation as of October 2nd. In fact, please ensure that you're submitting up those pending records and posting them to CALPADS for those pending initials for all students. And the reason I say that is because that is the only way that CDE knows that you've received parent consent for that initial and the 60-day clock has started for you. And that is also going to be one of the only ways that the data and reports that you pull from CalPADS will reflect those pending initials accurately. So it's a matter of not only reporting the information for your own monitoring purposes, but also for it's the only way that CDE knows that that clock has started. Be sure that those records have the referral date, referring party, meeting type, and plan type indicated. Once the meetings have been held for these students, generate a transaction with the appropriate outcome of the initial evaluation and make sure that that is posted to CalPADS as well. There's no need to delete the pending meeting record. That should just remain in place, and there should be no conflict with the actual meet record that comes up and is posted once the meeting is held. If during the course of the assessment, the parent changes their mind and they revoke consent for that assessment, the student will no longer be assessed. Make sure to deactivate that student's record in your special education data system and delete the pending record from CalPADS. It's very important because the clock is still going to be running for these students. And if they're no longer being assessed, that could lead to compliance issues. So if that consent is revoked, be sure to delete that pending meet record from CalPADS. So take a look at your overdue plan reviews and eligibility reevaluations for annual plan reviews and triennial reevals that are late as of census day, have not been held yet. Generate a pending transaction in your special education data system or add a pending meet record in online maintenance in CalPADS and indicate the appropriate delay code. Hopefully there's a valid reason for that, this meeting being late. But if it is late, overdue on census day, meeting has not been held yet, be sure to get up a pending meet record either through your special education data system or CalPADS online maintenance. The way I understood it previously was that you would need to backdate that pending meet record in order for us, CDE, when we do the data pull, to have that pending record in effect on census day. But I've since learned that the data pull will actually pick up pending records that were posted as after census day. It's going to pick up the most recent meeting record. So even if you didn't backdate that pending record, or if you're not able to, or if you forget, whatever, get that pending record posted anyway, because that would be the record in the instance that the meeting never gets held before the data pull. That would be the record that we pull, and with that valid delay code, it would keep that particular student's record compliant. You can monitor your timeline data in your special education data system. In SEIS, for example, there are the meeting alerts on the homepage that display upcoming and overdue annuals, reevals, initials, 30 days, that sort of thing. This information comes from the info eligibility page of the future IEP. It's also found on the dates and initial placement information page of the SEIS record. One thing to be very cognizant of is that these dates are manually entered. Even when using the calculate next and last dates feature in SEIS, that relies on often manually entered dates, and they could be wrong. I have worked when I was with the SELPA and with CDE, helping districts with records where the case manager predicted a 4-year time lapse between reevaluations, which of course is past the 3-year timeline and non-compliant. And at that point, there's really nothing they could do to rectify that. It was late without cause. I've also heard that if the case manager or IEP team, if they held a reevaluation last year and they're holding the annual plan review this year and they forget to uncheck the box to indicate that it's a reevaluation. When they calculate the dates, it's going to push that next reevaluation date a year further ahead. So that's another way that people can get caught up with bad dates, creating bad reminders. So these alerts are only as good as the data in the system. So make sure that these dates are accurate. I recommend asking your case managers or your program specialists or whomever to go through caseloads, go through, site caseloads, just to make sure that these next dates are accurate for your students. This is a good way to make sure that you're holding your meetings according to those statutory timelines, and you don't find yourself with a lot of records on your annual determination letter. You can also run a search in your special education data system to pull up this information. In SEIS, it's a little bit limited because if you pull up the current IEP, it's not going to pull up your most recent plan review and your most recent reevaluation. It's only going to pull up what was the most recent. But you can use this the search criteria and columns here as a good sort of data check to look for glaring red flags in the lapses between the last and next plan review and reevaluation. You can also run a search in your special education data system to monitor your parent involvement codes. So in SEIS, the search will pull that information from the student record, which comes from the future IEP. It's found on the parent consent page of the IEP, and the question is shown on this page as well, along with the column options and search criteria you can use to monitor this. The federal government expects that every response to this question is yes. And this isn't a question where you can indicate yes because the parent asked a couple of questions during the IEP meeting. This is a question that is asked directly to the parent. Did you feel that you were a part of this IEP process, and that the district, made you feel like you were involved with it? And so the feds expect the answer of yes. However, if you get no response and you indicate no response, that will not count against you. So this parent involvement is another performance plan indicator. I think it's indicator 8. But if the answer, or if the data is no response, that will not count in the denominator or numerator of the calculation for your performance plan indicator. So everything should be yes, unless they just do not respond, and then answering or indicating no response will not count against you. Again, in SIRAS, we again don't have direct experience with SIRAS, but they've provided some slides on monitoring the timeline data in SIRAS. So these are here for your reference for our SIRAS users. Reviewing the DSEA, District of Special Education Accountability extracts. So you can request and download these extracts in CALPADS. When you download them, they're going to come in a text file that is caret delimited. Now, caret is like the upwards arrow, Shift 6 on your keyboard. Not a very readable format. But if you download the extract templates that CSIS has created that are linked here, they make that process much more simple. You can just download the extract, open up the template, and click on the button, Import Extract File. And that will pull in the extract that you downloaded, and import it into these the templates that are already formatted in a much more easily read format. And the importance of these extracts is this is the only way that you will be able to find students for whom another district is pointing to you as the district of special education accountability. That's important because a lot of indicators and monitoring and dashboard information rolls back up to the district of special education accountability. So if a district has suspended a student, 20 times, and they're pointing to your district as the district of special education accountability, that's going to come back on you. So you need to make sure you're reviewing this information on a regular basis, and that the students for whom another district is indicating that you are the district of special education accountability is accurate. It would probably be very frustrating to find yourself in additional monitoring activities or your indicators looking awful because another district had pointed to you inaccurately. We see this often in situations where a student is matriculating from, say, an elementary district to a middle school or just 7 to 12 district. And when the district adopts the plan, they don't update that district of special education accountability. And so now all those students are still pointing back to the elementary district. So be sure to take a look at this on a regular basis to make sure that the students that you're accountable for are actually students you're accountable for, and not just sort of students that are being assigned to you because of a data inaccuracy. Compare the students in your special education data system to those in your SIS, your student information system. Investigate student records that are in one and not in the other. So if a student has exited from your student information system, they should also be exited in your special education data system, most likely with a transfer code if they're moving to another LEA. If a student is exited from special education in your special education data system, make sure they're not still showing as a student with disabilities in your student information system. You can also or should also compare race, ethnicity information in the two systems and make sure that any discrepancies are resolved. Race, ethnicity information, the data authority is going to be your student information system, meaning that for CalPADS reporting purposes, what is indicated on the student information file is going to be what is reported. But there could be situations where the data that is in your special education data system does not match, and you would want to investigate to make sure that you have the most accurate information reported to CalPADS. The student detail report. This is a SEIS only situation. In SEIS, you don't have the ability to look back in time, so to speak. So if today your special education administrator came and said, "Hey, can you tell me, how many students we had in the special day class last year?" In SEIS, you're not going to be able to find that because the data is updated continually. And so SEIS does have a student report that will pull in all of the information for your pending and eligible students, as well as any students that were exited or DNQ'd within the current school year up until the report date. SEIS generated this report for all districts on census day. So they essentially created a snapshot of your SEIS data as of census day. And you can use this to reconcile with your Fall 1 reports 16, 12, 13, and 14 to make sure that everything that's in SEIS is reflected in CalPADS accurately. And it's a good jumping point. Now, if you were just going to compare this report to, say, your 16-14 report, and you're just looking at the number of students that are reported, it's not going to match. And that's because the student report in SEIS also, as I mentioned, pulls in those students that were exited or DNQ'd at any point up until the report date. And And Fall 1 only looks at eligible and participating students on Census Day. So there will be a little bit of a discrepancy there, but this is really the only place you're going to be able to find this Census Day historical information in SEIS. SIRAS has a couple of reports that you can use to reconcile those students, and they've included links to Padlets that they've put together, and you can access those at the links in the slide. Fall 1 CALPADS data submission and reports. Brandy, this is usually where we take a 10-minute break. Did you want to do that?
Right. Yep.
All right, everybody, let's go ahead and break for 10 minutes. Be back here at 10:21. Okay, it's 10:21. Just want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we'll jump back into this. Fall 1's CALPADS data submission and reports. The Fall 1 submission collects current year enrollments, previous year, 1-year grads and dropouts, English language acquisition status, immigrant counts, free reduced price meals, and special education data. The reporting window opened on Census Day, October 2nd, and the initial certification deadline, December 13th, 2024. Brandy spoke about that earlier. That is going to be the date at which time we, CDE, pulls data for your annual determination letter. And again, the CALPADS will be down, I learned yesterday, the 14th, 15th, and 16th. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, after the certification deadline, CALPADS will be down. So you really need to make sure that you have everything posted and ready to go by this deadline and are at least LEA approved. Self-approval would be awesome, since a lot of this data that is going to be pulled that you're held accountable for is special education data, but at least LEA approval is required. Then the amendment window, of course, is open until January 24th of 2025. Planning for CALPADS Fall 1. Well, we're a little bit late in the show for planning, but ideally, you would take a look at the deadline and kind of work your way back. Get together with all of the stakeholders, your special education administrators, program specialists, site leads, whomever is going to be taking a part in reviewing the data, submitting the data, reconciling errors, all that sort of thing, is in the conversation when you're putting together this expected timeline. But again, work your way backwards from that certification deadline to, give yourself a couple weeks to certify and review the reports, and then work back from that, submitting the data, make sure everything's posted, working through your errors all the way back to Census Day and even before that, just so that everybody's on the same page with the expectations when it comes to getting everything put together and reviewed and approved for Fall 1. Rule number 1. What is the number 1 rule for working on your data discrepancies? If you know it, go ahead and drop it in the chat. Give it a few seconds. But the number 1 rule for working on data discrepancies, yes, submit your files, submit your data. Make sure that your data has been posted to CALPADS. And you don't even need to start looking at your certification reports until the data discrepancies are cleared. So again, getting everything posted to CALPADS, step 1. Step 2, clear the errors. Step 3, review the reports. So make sure the data has been posted. We we've been emphasizing that it's completely posted because there are some situations in which transactions can be created that are missing components that you would expect to be in the transaction. For example, and I know SEIS has sort of changed this process, but previously, if a case manager was going through the Affirm process, they may have indicated that they are affirming a non-SEIS IEP. And when they affirm, that tells SEIS, don't create a meeting record or a status record if required for this IEP because it's just an adoption of a non-SEIS IEP. And so you have a transaction for the IEP that you submit to CALPADS. It says it's completely posted, CALPADS accepted. And then when you look in CALPADS, there's no meeting record. And that's one of the reasons that can happen is because certain things could be indicated or selected during the Affirm process that would tell SEIS to only create certain records for the transaction. SEIS does now have the feature where you can look into your transactions, click on the pencil icon to edit the transaction, and at the top it will tell you if there is a meet, SWIDS, plan, and serve record in the transaction. Additionally, I learned over the course of the roadshows that CALPADS accepted doesn't actually mean CALPADS accepted. And what I mean by that is that indication in SEIS that a transaction has been accepted by CALPADS, all that really means is the transaction went through the SEIS internal validations and passed. It does not mean that data successfully transmitted to CALPADS. It does not mean that data was posted to CALPADS. It just means that it passed an internal validation check. So be very cognizant of that fact when you're looking to correct errors or you're looking to figure out why timelines are overdue, that there are certain situations in which transactions don't have the data that you would expect. You can review your data discrepancies in CALPADS. On the left-hand menu on any CALPADS page in the blue, click on Data Discrepancies. That'll take you to the Data Discrepancies page. You want to make sure you're selecting the correct academic year and certification cycle. You can change the error severity you're looking at to just look at fatal errors or look at errors and warnings or just warnings. You can look at particular record types. Say you only want to look at plan record data discrepancies. Once you've made all your selections, click Apply Filters. Your data discrepancies will not refresh until you click Apply Filters. Once that loads, you're going to see a screen similar to this. On the top left, it says the summary grid, and it has a discrepancies run start time and run completion time. And that's very important information. It basically tells you when your data discrepancies were last updated. So say you come in the morning and you're going to work on your data discrepancies and it says it last ran at 7 a.m. And so you spend a bunch of time working through your data discrepancies, posting data, making corrections, and then you come back to your data discrepancies and you apply your filters and all the errors are still there. And what's going on? Why is it this way? Double check and make sure that the discrepancies have re-ran since you started posting data. So if it still says data discrepancies completed at 7 a.m., that means that all of the changes you've made, while they are, as long as you verify that they're posted in CALPADS, the data is in CALPADS, but the data discrepancies have not refreshed for your data, and so you're still seeing the same errors. So monitor that when you're doing the corrections so you don't get frustrated thinking that none of the work actually went through. On the left in the summary grid is going to show you the errors and the count of those errors. With the fatal errors on the left, warnings on the right. Below that is a display grid that shows every error and the SSID that is triggering that error. You can either download the data discrepancy error extract or export it to a CSV. Either of those options are fine. When it comes to providing this information to your special education data system administrator, providing it in like an Excel sheet is a much better option than printing out 10 pages of errors, stapling it in the corner, and dropping it on their desk, right? The working in an Excel sheet, you can copy and paste the SSID back and forth between systems. You don't have to, read the printout and manually enter that information. You can use Excel for keeping notes. If one data discrepancy is a known issue, you can put a note there. And so when you're working on them in the future, you're able to keep track of the work that you've done. So either of those options are great. Again, when you're sharing this information with your special education data system administrator, for your CALPADS administrators, just make sure it's in a usable format. Because collaboration is critical. If your special education data administrator does not have access in CALPADS to your data discrepancies, be sure to share this with them. Most, if not all, data discrepancies are not accessible in your special education data system. The discrepancies are typically corrected by your special education data system administrator and not typically corrected by case managers. So it kind of just falls on the administrator to make these corrections. They may need to work with the case manager or whatever, but typically making those corrections involves working with transactions, and that's sort of beyond what a case manager can work in. And again, these data discrepancies don't appear in your data system typically. So you need the extract, or you need the information from CALPADS in order to know what you're going to have to do in your special education data system. Again, share it in a useful format, and the data discrepancies do refresh throughout the day as new data are posted. Sometimes maybe a little bit slower than we would like, but they do refresh. So just keep checking often if you're making corrections and making adjustments to see if the updates have corrected those errors for you. High frequency fall 1 data discrepancies. Plan0619 F1. What is the error? Students with disabilities that are 5 years old and in TK or higher must have a special education program setting populated and not equal to any of these early childhood settings. What does that mean? Essentially, it means that if you have an eligible participating student with disabilities that is 5 years old or older in a public school in a grade level of TK or higher, their IEP must be updated to reflect the fact that they are receiving these services in a school age setting. They're no longer receiving them in an early childhood setting. It needs to be updated to reflect the school age setting. Now, knowing when to update the plan can be tricky because students may turn 5 sometime, before the school year starts, or after it starts, but before census day. How do I time that? So we put together a few tables that should help you work through that decision. So if a student turns 5 before the school year begins, you can update the plan with an amendment with a plan effective start date as the first day of school or the amendment date. If the student turns 5 between the first day of school and census day, you would update with an amendment, and the plan effective start date would have to be the student's 5th birthday. If they turn 5 after census day, then just over the course of the rest of the year, either with an amendment or plan review, if there's one scheduled, you can update the plan, and the effective start date would need to be at least the student's 5th birthday. Now, if there's a plan review that's already scheduled, or the timeline requires that there be a plan review before census day, you would want to take a look at when the student turns 5. If they turn 5 before the plan review, you can simply update the values at that plan review meeting, and that will take care of this particular issue for that student. If they turn 5 after the plan review, but before census day, you would need to amend the plan effective as of the student's 5th birthday. Now, what if census day is passed? The amendment date and the plan effective start date should be equal to census day, October 2nd, 2024. If you're unable to add and this is in the case of census date having passed. If you're not able to add an amendment in your special education data system for any number of reasons, you can add the amendment plan and service records to CALPADS in online maintenance. I know SEIS will also let you create a transaction just for this purpose. It will create an amendment transaction that is an exact copy of the most recent plan record. And the only data that you can change in that is going to be the program setting and the general education participation percentage. I believe it sets the plan effective start date to census day automatically. And so then you can post that record to CALPADS, and that will update the plan as of census day to reflect the school age program setting. So does this require a meeting and parent consent? So we've changed, after some discussion, we've changed this a little bit. The meeting can simply be a discussion between the parent and the case manager or program specialist. Doesn't require the whole IEP team to get together. These changes in the program setting and participation percentage are typically discussed in depth at the IEP meeting prior to the student turning 5 and entering TK or kindergarten. And the parent understands that change in program setting and agrees with that general education participation percentage on that plan. So when all that is met, when you've had the discussion, the parent is aware of what is changing and they agree to it, then you can go ahead, create the record, whether it is the transaction or the amendment, and get that posted to CALPADS. You don't have to wait for the signature necessarily, just as long as the parent is aware of the changes that are coming beforehand and when they'll take effect, and they agree to the placement. Plan 619F1 Quiz. Dominic's next plan review is in January, but he turns 5 on September 27th. Please answer in the chat. Does the plan need to be updated before census day? See, yes, 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 that is correct. How should the plan be updated? An amendment. Yes, exactly. Should be updated with an amendment. And what should the plan effective start date be? Effective as, I see, 5th birthday. That's correct. September 27th, date of birth. Yep, September 27th. That's correct. Thank you all. Link has a plan review scheduled for September 15th and then turns 5 on October 3rd. Does the plan need to be updated before census day? That's correct. It does not. No. And so the other questions, of course, don't apply because the plan does not need to be updated before census day. It also does not apply because Link is my dog. And then just a special one for the attendees of this live statewide Zoom. You get to see Zelda too. She sneaks in there. So special treat just for y'all. I will tell you that Zelda snores like a freight train. And so she's not as cute and innocent as she would have you believe. Anyway, moving on to SENR 606F1. What is this error? Eligible and participating students with disabilities aged 3 and up who are enrolled with an LEA must have a plan record reported by that LEA. So what does that mean? It means that a student is enrolled in your district that has an active plan reported to CALPADS from another district, and they're currently eligible and participating according to the most recent Students with Disabilities status record. Students may transfer in from another district or private school with that eligible and participating status and a current plan in CALPADS. But as we all know, parents don't always tell us when they're enrolling their student that their student has an IEP for one reason or another. So you can find these students using Monitoring Report 1621. We recommend generating this report at least weekly You can coordinate with your student information system administrator and CALPADS administrator, find out when they submit enrollments, and then plan to generate this report after that. So say, for example, your administrator submits up all their enrollments on Fridays. You could set a calendar reminder to run this report every Monday morning, and that's going to capture all of the enrollments from the prior week and identify those students that may need to have a plan adopted. So you want to generate this report without making any changes to the filters or the criteria, and download it in a CSV format. CSV format, we're specifically saying that if you download it in Excel, it's going to have the typical CalPADS report formatting with the nice green boxes and all of that, but it's going to be very difficult to format or or edit the data because there's a lot of merged cells and formatting and that sort of thing. So CSV is just simply your data. It's going to be much easier to manipulate. And what you want to do is look at your plan LEA name column, and you want to filter out your district. And when you filter out your district, the remaining students are going to be students that are enrolled with you and have active, eligible, and participating status records and have plan records, but those plan records were submitted by different districts. And that tells you that you need to find these students, get access to their records. If you have the same special education data system, or otherwise get a hold of the IEP and make sure that you are adopting that plan and posting that to CalPADS. If you don't, that's going to trigger that SENR 606 F1, because it's looking at your district to see if you are reporting the plan record, essentially acknowledging that you have enrolled a student with disabilities, you're going to be implementing this plan. You may amend it later, whatever. But that's essentially what you need to do to avoid SENR 606. Fall 1 report review. I think I'll take a look at the questions, the Q&A, just before we get started in the new section. Maria, I have a case manager that made changes to the goals on an affirmed IEP without a meeting or parental consent and reaffirmed the IEP. Number 1, is an amendment meeting and signed consent required when making changes to the goals? Number 2, should the reaffirmed IEP be reported or not? So yes to number 1. I would say that if you're making changes to, unless it's just like a typo that's being corrected, that's probably not as big of a deal. But if it's like a large material change to those goals, then I would say absolutely that needs to be a meeting involving the parent and the IEP team, and that they agree to those changes. As far as reporting the reaffirmed IEP, if the only changes were to goals, then you would not need to report that, because none of the information that is reported to CalPADS will have changed. But yeah, also be sure that your case managers understand that they should not be doing this sort of thing without meeting with the parent. And if they're making changes to a current IEP, they should be amending it. Carol asks, are overdue plan meeting on the 1621 report ours to clean up, or is it possible that the errors are from a previous district? If so, should we reach out to the other district for changes, or should I reach out to SEIS to have them help me? So it depends on exactly what you're looking at. If you have meetings that are overdue and have not been held yet, they are your responsibility. The timeline moves with the student, just like the plan. And so if the meetings are overdue and have not yet been held, you would need to rectify that. Now, you can use a delay code if a student transferred in and they had exceeded the timeline. There's a valid delay code that would account for that. But otherwise, if it's just, even if it was not held at the previous district, now that they are with you, their timelines are your responsibility. And Lastly, Sandra, we have a student situation similar to what you described. Student was found eligible in preschool, parents signed the IEP, and then decided they disagreed with the placement in a special day class. They placed it in private school for preschool and kindergarten, and the IEP was never implemented. He's at my charter school now in first grade. IEP is 3 years overdue, and we will assess. Is it considered a triennial or initial? Since the student was never found ineligible, and it doesn't seem that the parent revoked consent in writing, the student is eligible, and so this would be a triennial.
But it would also have to be an annual, right? Because
Right.
you're still technically out of, or that student still hasn't had their annual meeting, so it would have to be both.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that, Brandy. Typically, every reeval is a plan review, but I kind of took that for granted. So Brandy is correct. That would be a plan review as well as a reevaluation. All right. Fall 1 reports. Report 1612, students with disabilities planned by primary disability count. Data in this report are used to calculate indicators 9 and 10, disproportionality and disproportionality by disability. Make sure all students with disabilities enrolled and on active plans on census day are reflected in this report, including your students in NPS schools. Make sure they are represented. Review counts by race ethnicity and work with your CALPADS administrator to make sure that data is correct. Make corrections if necessary. Review the plan types. These are good sort of big red flags. If you do not serve infants in your district, your IFSP count should be 0. Check for ISPs, plan type 200. If you do not serve private school students within your district boundaries, that number should also be 0. So those are some pretty easy indicators to look at least some low-hanging fruit to catch that. Review those counts by primary disability. Make sure the count is consistent with your special education data system. That census day report from SEIS is an excellent resource. How do the counts compare with prior years? In this slide, we suggest running report 1612 from fall 1 of 2023 and look for large increases or decreases that may need investigation. Just released a couple of days ago, CalPADS report 16.17 is basically an annual comparison report. We won't be going through that in this presentation, but it will essentially pull information for your students and also report what was reported for the prior year and calculate the difference and the percent difference for you. So that would be a useful tool when you're comparing to prior year data. Report 1613, count by federal setting. So these are the program settings and your general education participation percentage data that it's used to calculate indicators 5 and 6, least restrictive environment. So take a look at the counts in every setting and make sure they make sense for your students. For example, if you're not a county office of education, you should not have students in a correctional facility. Again, you can compare this to prior year and look for significant increases or decreases in these values. On this report, the general education participation percentages are reported in the 3 sort of ranges: less than 40%, 40 to 79%, and 80% and above. Look for glaring or large values in those columns and make sure they make sense. You'll use report 1614 to check it student by student. We'll discuss that in a moment. But just make sure that you want to validate that students in particular placements have those gen ed participation percentages that make sense. So report 1614, the planned student list. This is probably going to be the report you spend the most time in, because it's essentially all of the data that is aggregated up into reports 1612 and 1613. So if you're looking at one of those reports and you see a count or a value that doesn't make any sense, you would come to 1614 and find out, you would use that report to find what records are accounting for those values that you're not expecting in 1612 and 13. You download this again as a CSV from CalPads. As I mentioned earlier, the Excel format, while it looks nice with the green and the big boxes and all that, it's not very easy to sort or manipulate that data. You want to use a CSV in Excel instead. Review individual student race ethnicity data with your CalPads admin to verify accuracy for indicators 9 and 10. You can filter this by age. So look for students that are 16 and up. And you can see that the transition and post-secondary info and participation indicators are reported in the last 8 columns on the right. Look for students that have blanks or no's in those indicators. Verify that's correct. For Fall 1, for the Plan 390 to 397 F1 errors, if the student's 16 years old or older on census day, the questions must be answered yes, no, or not. One of them is not applicable, but there needs to be answers for those students. Again, if you're just trying to get past Fall 1, just make sure they're answered, and then make sure they're answered correctly in a subsequent plan before the end of the year, because this is indicator 13. That data is pulled at the end of the year, but if you're going through this right now, you can take the time to make the corrections if it's a simple administrative issue. Compare the school of attendance and the program setting. So if you're seeing a student that is reported in a program setting such as regular classroom, but they're in an NPS, that's not correct, or vice versa. If they're reported in a separate school, but they're enrolled at your regular local kindergarten or elementary, that's also probably not correct. And then check the program setting against the general ed participation percentage. If a student is reported in a regular classroom, but their gen ed participation percentage is like 1, that may be an issue. So you want to investigate that. That could be that transposition of numbers that I spoke about earlier. But you just want to make sure to look for red flags like that. Because again, this data comes back to your LRE indicators when it comes to the participation percentage. And so if you're reporting low values inadvertently, you're not going to meet your targets. Speaking of State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report indicators using Fall 1 data. The federal indicators and annual targets. There's an indicator guide at the link shown, systemimprovements.org. It's a PDF document that goes through every indicator in detail, talks about the data sources and the calculations that are used for these indicators. When will my 2024-25 data show up in our local annual performance report? As Brandy mentioned earlier, this is lag data. So the data that you're certifying this year will not show up in your annual performance report until the following year. And we looked at that enormous Word document at some of these values earlier. You saw the table and what it looks like for each of those indicators. And again, a link to that page is on this slide as well. Indicator 5, least restrictive environment. It utilizes 3 separate components, A, B, and C, to measure whether students with disabilities are educated within the least restrictive environment. So what that means is that these indicators describe how inclusive your district is with your students with disabilities. And so this is one that we pay close attention to. The federal government pays close attention to this. Indicator 5A looks at your students with disabilities 5 years or older in TK or higher, served inside the regular classroom 80% more or more of the day. Indicator B looks at the same group of students served in the regular classroom less than 40% of the day. And 5C looks at the same group of students served in private separate schools or public separate schools, residential facilities, or homebound hospital placements. When we looked at the grid, the indicator grid before, it shows the values that you achieved and the target and whether or not that was met. On the right-hand side of this slide are the 2024-25 targets for these indicators. So you can see it's expected that 67% or more of your students land in 5A, meaning they're served inside the regular classroom 80% or more of the day. These targets get more ambitious as time goes on. The 25-26 target might be 68% or 70%, something along those lines. So it's important to be aware of these indicators, these targets, and what goes into them.
Also, I just wanted to mention that if you take a look at what the Office of Special Education Programs is having us measure here, you can clearly see they're measuring the percentage of time in general education and the setting, right? So Dominic talked about some things that you need to look at in those reports, specifically 1614, where if your case managers are transposing those numbers of the percentage of time in general education, students will end up in 5B or 5C where they should actually be in 5A. Or if you've adopted a plan and you haven't updated the student's program setting, then students could potentially end up in 5B or 5C when they actually belong in 5A. And again, this is a measurement of how inclusive your district is for students with disabilities. How many of them are interacting with their gen ed peers at a higher rate? That's what they're measuring here. And so oftentimes when the annual performance reports come out or the annual determination letters come out, we have districts say, hey, well, this percentage is not correct, right? We have met the target. And oftentimes it's because their data were wrong. And we don't want that to happen to you. So please pay attention to program setting, the general education percentage specifically for indicator 5. And then he's going to talk about indicator 6. Program setting is really important for that as well.
Thanks, Brandy. Yes. Indicator 6 is preschool least restrictive environment. So it is also broken out into A, B, and C. Looking at your reported program settings and your least restrictive environment, how much you are, your special education students are participating with their peers. So 6A looks at the percent of children with disabilities aged 3 to 5, excluding TK and above, attending a regular early childhood program and receiving the majority of instruction in that regular early childhood program. 6B looks at the same group of students attending a separate special education class, separate school, or residential facility. And 6C looks at the same group of students receiving services in the home. So again, the targets are on the right-hand side of the slide. 6A is you want the most students in 6A. That target is also going to be more ambitious as time goes along. And ideally, your special education students in preschool programs are participating in regular early childhood programs.
Yep. Before Dominic goes to the next slide, I just wanted to point out, because it's also a question that we get pretty regularly. And when we were evaluating some of the data, we saw preschool age students. So we're talking about kids from ages 3 to 5 that were identified as being in a TK program. And that's perfectly fine if you have someone ages 3 to 5 that's in TK. But that grade level of TK should only be used if the student is actually enrolled in a district TK program. Okay, oftentimes we see you using that TK grade level because the student is of age to be in transitional kindergarten. But you should not be using that grade level unless they're actually enrolled in a transitional kindergarten program. Just wanted to clarify that.
That's a really good point, Brandy. Thank you. So, frequently asked question, which program setting code should be used for preschool age students receiving services but not enrolled in a preschool program at the LEA? And so if a student is enrolled at a regular early childhood program outside of the LEA, you can select 201, regular early childhood program. If the student is not enrolled in any preschool program and receives services only, you can select 204, service provider location. If the student is not enrolled in a regular early childhood program at your LEA, you're going to have to ask the parent, are they attending Head Start? Do you have a regular preschool class that they go to? That sort of thing. Those apply, and those would count as regular early childhood programs. So be sure to have those discussions if this is a scenario you find your students in where they're receiving services but not enrolled with your LEA. They may be attending, a private preschool or something. There could be other scenarios that would fit 201, regular early childhood program. So if you can count those students in that population, you want to.
And folks, this was a big issue for disproportionality identification, right? A lot of districts were identified as disproportionate for program settings for their preschool age students, specifically because they weren't getting this correct, right? They were putting all of their preschool kids that weren't enrolled in a district preschool program in 204, service provider location. And it's because they weren't asking the question, like Dominic said. They weren't asking the question, are you enrolled in a regular early childhood program anywhere? Because if you are, you can use 201, which will increase your percentage towards that target in 6A. Okay, so it's really important that you make sure that you're asking that question so that all of your kids aren't landing in 6B.
Absolutely. Using your special education data system to look for indicators 5 and 6. SEIS doesn't have a built-in search necessarily, but I've put together some search criteria and column options that you can use to take a look at your student body and find out what they're being reported in. Also recommend having case managers or program specialists go through their caseloads or go through their site rosters or whatever to make sure that everything is correct. And then, of course, validating that what you find as correct in your special education data system is what is posted and reflected in CALPADS as well. What reports can you use to verify that data in CALPADS? Report 1613 is the count by federal setting. 1614 is, again, the student list. And that student list is going to be the data of all of your students that is aggregated up into 1613. So when you're verifying that data and you're seeing counts in your special education data system that don't match counts on 1613, you can use 1614 to find out which students are being accounted for in that and make comparisons to your special education data system to know what may need to be changed. Indicator 9, overall disproportionality. Indicator 9 measures the percent of districts with disproportionate representation of racial and ethnic groups receiving special education as a result of inappropriate identification. So for disproportionality, accurate race ethnicity data is critical, and not just for your students with disabilities, but for all of your students. That's because the risk ratio, which is what is used to calculate, and calculating that risk ratio is how we identify districts as disproportionate. It compares the students with disabilities population to the overall school population. So if the race ethnicity data is inaccurate for students with disabilities or not, students in the gen ed population, then your LEA could be identified disproportionate when you're not actually disproportionate. So it's very critical that the race ethnicity information reported in CALPADS is accurate. I've heard anecdotally that a lot of CalPADS administrators wait till the amendment window to get to the race ethnicity data because they're rushing to get to the fall 1 deadline, and that involves like LCFF funding and all sorts of other things that are high priority. But this race ethnicity data is just as high a priority. So CalPADS administrators, be sure that you are making sure that the race ethnicity data is correct before December 13th, before that initial deadline, because that's going to be the data that we use when making these calculations. Indicator 10 is much the same as indicator 9. But it looks into individual disability categories as opposed to overall inappropriate identification. The data for your annual determinations letter. So current year data are used for your annual determinations letter from fall 24-25. That data would be used for disproportionality, preschool and school age, race, ethnicity, and settings. So remember, least restrictive environment, as Brandy spoke, when preschool students were in an incorrect program setting, districts were found disproportionate when they maybe should not have been. It's just because their data was bad or inaccurate. This data also is part of calculating significant disproportionality, though discipline data for Dispro does come from prior year. Additionally, we use the operational data store, which is essentially the live CalPADS database for your annual plan review and triennial reevaluation timelines. So those overdue plan reviews and reevaluations as of census day, that comes from the live CalPADS database, the online data store. And remember, this data is going to be pulled on the initial certification deadline, December 13th, 2024. The next handful of slides I borrowed from the CSIS Fall 1 training. I thought they were pretty useful, especially when discussing what reports outside of the special education reports you can use to look at this. I'm not going to go through these in great detail, but I think they're well worth a read. It talks about Dispro and the different sort of categories of disproportionality. And then we have disproportionality calculation logic. We have a document that explains how these values are calculated. It's available in the meeting materials link. And I'll go ahead and open that as well, just to show you what is in this document. So trying to make it as readable as possible. So this documentation put together by Stephen Rogers in our unit. Thank you, Stephen. I'm not going to ask you to read through this. I just appreciate that you're here. It goes through the aggregation logic, determinations of federal ethnicity. So this one is important because it's not necessarily self-evident how, whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to scroll the page, how these calculations are determined with federal race ethnicity categories. So it walks through here. If the Hispanic indicator is yes, federal ethnicity is Hispanic, regardless of the race or races selected. If Hispanic is no, and the student only has one race selected, the federal ethnicity is that race. If Hispanic is left blank or no, and the student has more than one race selected, and all selected races are of any of the Asian subcategories, the federal ethnicity is Asian. The same applies if all selected races are of the Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander subcategories. Federal ethnicity is Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. If more than one race category is selected, Hispanic indicator is no or blank. And at least one of the races selected is not in the Asian or Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander subcategory. Federal ethnicity is multiple ethnicities. If Hispanic indicator is left blank or no, and the race category missing indicator is yes, meaning there is no race or ethnicity information reported for the student, federal ethnicity is multiple ethnicities. And so it's very important to be aware of that because you could find that students who may have actually belonged to a different category are rolling up into multiple ethnicity because the information is not being collected. Maybe the parent is filling out the forms on their phone and is just going through it as fast as they can in traffic, and that's how you do that. That could lead to a student being inadvertently counted under multiple ethnicities, and that could throw off the ratio. So it's important that the most accurate information is gathered and reported. So if you have students that don't have any information, be sure to talk to the parent or whomever and just explain what the data is being used for. Some parents may be uncomfortable providing this information, but if you have that conversation and explain what the data is used for, perhaps they'll change their mind and make a decision or make an indication into that data for you. I spoke earlier about a calculation for a risk ratio. There's information on that, and then the actual formulas for Dispro and Dispro by disability, for placement and discipline are here as well. The alternate risk ratio, and then the data sources, where the data that informs disproportionality comes from, whether it is Fall 1 census or end of year, 3 for discipline, and then information on significant disproportionality, which I just realized I haven't spoken about. Significant disproportionality is basically if an LEA is disproportionate for 3 consecutive years in the same areas, combination of race, ethnicity, and category, the LEA becomes significantly disproportionate. And part of what that means is that 15% of your federal IDEA funds must be set aside for early intervening services and plans so that your LEA does not continue to misidentify or over-identify students. And that money goes towards general education students rather than students with disabilities that it is intended originally to serve. So it is a very severe financial consequence for significant disproportionality, and it talks a bit about that in this document. And then it goes through the data elements that are used in the calculations and the reports as well. So this is in the meeting materials. You can download this. And I just want to say again, thanks to Stephen and my team for sharing this.
So, Dominic, we do have a question from Doug Hawkins that let's try and address.
Right. For the race determination of disproportionality, does it use the ethnicity race reported as of information date or last year's ethnicity race using last year discipline data? So is the scenario you're thinking of that it was reported in one category last year, and that would be the discipline that is used, and then maybe it was updated or corrected to a different category for LRE, for example? I don't know the answer to that. Brandy, do you?
So when we're talking about current year data, it's using race ethnicity reported as of census day, and that's specifically disproportionality, looking at race ethnicity, primary disability, and program setting. But when you're talking about the race ethnicity for discipline data, that's actually aligns with whatever was certified, the race ethnicity that was certified with those discipline data from the prior year.
So it could make a difference if that data was changed or updated.
It changed, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then there are a couple of other questions. The data reported to CalPADS for Dispro indicators, are they generated from the student information system or special education data system? Both. So all of the plan and special education information like program setting, general education participation, the least restrictive environment, that comes from the special education data system. Race, ethnicity, and discipline come from your student information system. So I mentioned that the slides from CSIS talked about some of the other CalPADS reports that you can use to look at your Dispro, your race ethnicity information. Report 1.5, you can run it unfiltered and then run it filtered for students with disabilities and take a look at those counts in those different categories. Look for significant differences in the overall population percentages compared to the student with disability percentages. Those are situations where you could find yourself in disproportionality. Additionally, report 1.2, primary and short-term enrollment, you can download that as a CSV. Filter the column for students with disabilities indicator yes, and then you can filter the race ethnicity column for each category, and then look at the students that are reported and make sure that identify those that are missing the data, compare the counts with those overall counts, again, as a data check against disproportionality. And special education data administrators likely will not have access to report 1.2 or 1.5. So your CalPADS administrator can provide those for you because you likely would not have the roles required for that. Also, some CalPADS administrators, many of us are very protective of our data, right? Because we're, essentially held accountable for it. Additionally, there are laws and guidelines around who can access student data. CalPADS administrators who are hesitant to share this report 1.2 or 1.5 with your special education administrator should understand that the special education administrator does have a legitimate business need to view the data in these reports because this information is part of the calculation for disproportionality. So if you run into that situation where the CalPADS administrator is hesitant, you can explain that, and of course, reach out to us if they need further clarification. Identifying Dispro in a specific category, you can use report 1614, filtering column 11 for the different race ethnicity categories, and compare the counts of the primary disability with the other race counts. And 1614, again, looking at program setting and general education participation percentage for your least restrictive environment. Again, collaboration is critical. I say it all the time. Dispro is a very serious subject that requires collaboration between everybody who's involved with the student data. Your CalPADS administrators, student information system coordinators, special education data system coordinators, even case managers and IEP team when it comes to aggregating that data into the record. You need to make sure that there are processes in place where everybody is coordinating and everybody is making sure that the data is correct and represented accurately in all systems. If the demographic information in your special education data system is different from what's in your student information system, investigate that, make corrections, verify that the information is correct as posted and reported in CalPADS. And take a look at Fall 1 for last year and look for large variances in that data as well. The timeline compliance data for students with disabilities enrolled, eligible, and participating on Census Day, whose annual plan reviews are overdue as of Census Day, is overdue eligibility reevaluations are overdue as of Census Day, meaning that the meeting is overdue, has not been held. Those are the students that will appear on your annual determination letter. So be sure to take a look at report 1621 and look into those overdue meetings where it has not been held There's no pending record that's been reported to indicate a delay code, that sort of thing. Make sure that all of your overdue meetings are addressed, and updated information, correct information is posted to CALPADS.
I also did want to add, because we were getting questions about this. Remember, we're looking at students who were enrolled on Census Day, whose meetings were late as of Census Day. However, if you held a meeting after Census Day, or you submitted up a pending meet record with a valid delay code with a date after Census Day, and as long as that occurs by December 13th, then you're good. You don't have to worry about it. Okay, but the idea is to focus on the kids that are going to be generating on your October 2nd report. Okay, as long as they have a category of overdue, make sure that you're focusing on those students. You get their meetings held, or you send up the pending record. Then, once we get closer to the deadline, you can run the report as of the current date to see if a lot of those kids have dropped off, right? Because their meetings have been held. Only the kids who are still overdue when we pull the data on December 13th are going to be included in your annual determination letter.
Excellent. Thank you, Brandy. Monitoring reports and holding timely meetings. So monitoring report 1621 is kind of a Swiss Army knife of a report. It's excellent. We include a link to the report mapping guide. Students who appear in this report are enrolled in your LEA on the report as of date with a primary short-term or non-ADA enrollment in grades preschool, TK and above, with a special education status of 1, eligible and participating, regardless of the LEA that submitted that. You should also note that students whose most recent enrollment was exited with code E155 or E156 are considered to still be enrolled in the district. Those codes indicate that the student is expected to return the following year. And so by that virtue, you are still responsible if they have not enrolled elsewhere, or you have not submitted up a new enrollment, or adjusted this enrollment if you determine that they've left the state, for example. Where can you find report 1621? The SELPA level report is in the left-hand blue menu under reports and SELPA reports. The LEA level report is in the same area under accountability monitoring reports. The only difference between the two reports is that the SELPA level report has access to all LEAs in that SELPA, whereas the LEA level report is only for that district. So what are you looking for on 1621? You want to make sure that the meet records that are posted to CalPADS are accurate. Are the students appearing in the correct monitoring category? For instance, plan held late, or timely, or overdue. Make sure that that those counts are, and the students in those categories are what you expect. Is data missing, or is the data incorrect? Is the data consistent with what you see in your special education data system? Are the students in the overdue category truly students that have not had a meeting? Those are some of the things that you need to dig into. And we've got some information here on the next several slides. But at this point, I'd like you to go ahead and hopefully you're able to generate and download a 1621 report for your LEA. Go ahead and open that up and compare it to what's in your special education data system. And we'll give you a few minutes here. Please type in the chat some things that you're looking at, like as far as what you want to tackle first, or if you're identifying.
Dominic,
yes.
I don't think we sent out a message to participants asking them to download it. So let's just go through it. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Deal. All right. So I'm going to open up report 1621 and we'll go through that. This document, student information has been removed. So let me zoom in just a little bit so it's more easily read. You can see at the top of every document or of every column, there's this little drop-down arrow. And what this is I've added filters to every column. To add filters to your data, in the home ribbon here, you would click on sort and filter, and then filter, and that's going to add that drop-down to every column. And so we're going to look for our overdue meetings. So we need to scroll over to our monitoring category column, and we're going to filter this. And we're just going to look for the overdue records. So you select those and hit OK, and the data will refresh to show just those records that fall into that monitoring category. Then you can sort by elapsed days, greatest or largest to smallest. And for this first student, it looks like they're about 6 years overdue for their reeval, or 3 years, I guess. But what does this really say? Is a student really going this long without having a reevaluation? Maybe there's another reason that they've gone this long without a reevaluation. Maybe they exited special education and that exit was never posted to CALPADS, either with your LEA or in a prior LEA. So this is what you want to look at. These are the students you want to look for, and make that determination. Do a little bit of research, find out if there's, when we talk about missing data, and I've heard Brandy speak about this at the roadshows, when we looked at this last year for the annual determination letter, and I know it was a little bit wonky. We looked at students who were overdue on census day, enrolled and overdue on census day, looked at them again on February 13th. There were about 70,000 students that had non-compliant timelines. And so by the time August 20th, the first deadline had rolled around, and everybody had been working really hard to get the data posted, that got down to 17,000, which is still a ridiculous amount, if I'm being honest. And the vast majority of that is just missing data or bad data. A situation where maybe a meeting was intended to be a plan review and a reevaluation, but the case manager did not indicate that it was a reevaluation. And so that meeting came up and posted and did not report that it was also a reeval, and so that timeline becomes non-compliant. That missing data is going to be the key to resolving a lot of these issues. I spoke earlier about the enrollment, so we have included on this report in the final 3 columns the enrollment exit date, enrollment exit reason, and completion status. So you can look for your students that were in their most recent enrollment was that they were expected to come back. By virtue of that, obviously they've not returned, and so you need to investigate and see what's going on with these students. Did they enroll and the enrollment hasn't been posted to CALPADS? Did they enroll in another district, a private school? Did they leave the state? All of those things could change the exit reason here. That would mean that you're no longer responsible or accountable for these students. So this is also one area that you'll want to investigate in this report when you're looking at those overdue timelines. Back over here. All right, it's kind of hanging on me a little bit. All right. So when you have those overdue timelines, you can also, one of the categories you can choose is, if there is a pending record present, and usually that's going to, that pending meet record is going to be something that indicates to CALPADS that the meeting is overdue, but perhaps there's a valid delay code. And so in this particular selection, we have left off those overdue timelines that have pending records. So you can see that all of these records here do not have a pending meeting record. And so could potentially a valid delay code be reported with a pending meet record that would make these timelines compliant? It's another thing you can take a look at in your special education data system, talking to case managers to determine, why it's overdue, and if there's a valid delay code, you could send up with the pending record. This is another way that you can take these records out of the overdue non-compliant category. Are there meeting records in your special education data system that have not posted to CALPADS? Or is there missing data in your transactions? I spoke about this earlier in the presentation. There are scenarios in which a transaction can be created where you would expect there to be a meeting record, but something was indicated in the Affirm process that told, and I'm speaking for SEIS specifically, that's the system I have knowledge of, that told SEIS to not create a meet record for that transaction. So you're seeing that everything's posted, you're looking at CalPads or in SEIS, and it says, yeah, everything is CalPads accepted, you're fine. But it turns out that meet record is not there in CalPads. And that's what you really have to validate, is that the data is posted in CalPads, because that's where we're pulling the data from. If it's correct in SEIS, but it's not correct in CalPads, well, we don't have access to all your SEIS data. That's not how this reporting functions. It functions based on your data that you have posted to CalPads. So look for those scenarios in which case a meeting was held, but the meet record didn't make it, or like I just mentioned, perhaps it wasn't indicated correctly as a reeval or a plan review, or however that works. Those are just some things you can investigate. You can also look at your late meetings and make sure they have valid delay codes. So selecting in the filter plan review and reevaluation held late, and you can see that there's not many delay codes here. So if we filter, just looking for blank and late without cause, because blank is essentially late without cause. You can see there's a large number of missing delay codes here for late meetings. Now, this information is not something that is collected in the annual determination letter. You're not going to be looking at meetings that were held late. Remember, we're just looking at meetings that were overdue as of census day. Those are the students that we're looking at. But it's also important to make sure that this data in CalPads is accurate. I was working, or I had answered a question earlier. If the meeting was held late and it was held late without cause, can we just leave it blank, or should we put in code 90? I would advise putting in code 90, because that way, when you are looking into this, or you're looking at this report and you see that 90, you know that it was determined that there is no valid delay code here, right? But if it's blank, now you have something you need to investigate. And so you can save future you, or future administrator in another district some research time by indicating that it's late without cause when it is truly late without cause, and you know that. Let's see. Also, we talked much earlier about SENR 606 F1, right? Where the student is transferred in, but you have not reported an adopted plan record. This is where you can filter on the plan LEA name, right? And you want to remove your LEA, sorry, ABC Unified, remove your LEA from the filter. And now all of these students are students that are enrolled with you, have a plan record reported by another LEA, and have a status of eligible and participating. These are all students where you're going to need to adopt the plan and get that posted to CalPads in order to avoid or correct SENR 606. So that's everything I have to run through for 1621. Let me take a quick look at the questions. Cathiola, clarification, students from the census day poll are the students who will be reported on the annual letter. Yes, that's correct. Those on the census day poll that were overdue on either timeline and that subsequently on December 13th do not have a pending or an actual meeting posted to CalPADS. Okay, it looks like there's conversation there. Oh, and the other one disappeared. So, okay. If anybody does have any questions about 1621, feel free to post it in the Q&A. But for now, we'll move on to the next report. I'll go through these slides again real quick. We had kind of glossed through them. These are the things that I just looked through and that I just showed. So what you should look for, missing meet records, exits not reported, enrollment exits not reported accurately, pending meetings not submitted, meeting records missing from transactions that are posted to CalPADS. You can use these slides as a guide as to some of the things you should be looking for in 1621 when you're looking to correct your overdue timelines. And again, the late meetings with the meeting delay code that's blank or 90, you can search for that as well. And again, that SENR 606, filtering on plan LEA name to make sure that you've adopted transactions for all of the students that have enrolled with you. I do see a question. If the overdue meetings were not held prior to Census Day, October 2nd, do we still submit the pending meetings since they were held in November or after 10/2? If you've held the meeting and you report that meeting record, I believe Brandy stated earlier that student would then not appear on your report. If the meeting's not been held and you can submit up a pending record with a valid delay code, then be sure to do that if that's the only available option to you.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for one of two things, right? So we're pulling the data as of December 5th or December 13th. And if the student's meeting was overdue as of October 2nd, and after that date, we don't see that the meeting has been held, or we don't see a pending record with a valid delay code, then the meeting or then that student will be included in your timeline compliance section for the annual determination letter. So we're looking for either or. Now, if the meeting's been held, I think what you're asking is, do I also have to send up a pending record prior to the meeting being held? No, right? So if it's been held and that transaction's up there, then don't worry about submitting a pending record because it's no longer pending. It's been held.
Thank you, Brandy.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, definitely. You don't need to submit up the superfluous pending record. And additionally, you don't need to go back and delete pending records once you submit up an actual meet record and post it. Held but not finalized. Yeah, as long as the meeting has been held, at least at one point, even if it's going to be continued at a later date, that sort of thing, or the parent has not yet agreed to the offer, you would want to go ahead and report at least the meet record. You can affirm without signature, and that'll create the meet record for the transaction that you can use to post that to CalPADS, or you can post it with online maintenance. Denise asks, how many pending records can be submitted at a time? I don't know that there is a cap necessarily. And I think maybe this is related to in SEIS, if you're creating a pending record, it can only be for a plan review or a reevaluation, but not both. One thing you can do in that scenario is once you have created that pending record, and I'm not 100% sure that SEIS allows this, but you can edit the meeting information to indicate that it was a plan review and a reevaluation. If SEIS won't allow that kind of editing in the transaction, then once you've posted it to CalPADS, you can edit that transaction in CalPADS, that record in CalPADS in online maintenance to add the appropriate indicator.
Yeah, and this is really important, folks, because if you try to send up two pending records from SEIS, one for the annual, one for the triennial, you're going to get an error. You're not going to be allowed to do it. So you can only get one of those records in there. But if the tri and the annual are going to be occurring on the same day, you have to go into online maintenance and update that pending record to indicate that both the tri and the annual are pending. If you don't do that, then the student is very likely going to show as overdue for one of those meeting types. So the other thing I would ask is that if this is functionality that you want within your IEP system, if you want to be able to send up one pending record for both an annual and a triennial plan review or triennial reevaluation, you need to talk to your vendors about making this functionality available within your IEP system. Okay, you are their clients, so talk to them and tell them that you don't want to have to go into CalPADS and update the record manually.
Yes, absolutely. The customer is always right, I've heard. Thank you, Brandy. Let's see. The inaccurate meeting delay codes, looking for those late without cause meeting delays, and making sure that the delay codes are compliant for records that are posted. Coming soon, two new initial evaluation monitoring reports, one for the 60-day timeline and one for the third birthday evaluation. These are both expected to release in December. One important caveat about the third birthday report is it will never be completely 100% comprehensive. And the reason for that is the third birthday evaluation is looking at for your Part C infant students that they had their Part B initial evaluation by their third birthday. Not all, in fact, most Part C students are not reported in CalPADS. So they're mostly served in regional centers. Regional centers report that data to DDS, Department of Developmental Services, who then give that information to us. We do some database magic and cross tab that with CalPADS records to monitor those timelines. So for the IFSP students that are served in county offices or at the district level, that those students will be identified as Part C students in CalPADS, and that report will help you monitor their third birthday timelines. But for those students in regional centers, unfortunately, we just don't have that data in CalPADS, and so this report will not account for those students. Report 1624, Students with Disabilities Meetings Student List. This is a report of meet records for students held in the academic year. It's very important that you pay attention to these filters as of the report date. So if you run this report with the filters that we see here, academic year 2024-25 as of September 13th, the only meet records that are going to appear on your report are meetings that you held before September 13th, between July 1st and September 13th of this school year. It's not going to pull prior year. So if you want to look at your prior year meet records, change the academic year to 2023-2024 as of June 30th, and that's going to report all of the meet records for the meetings that you posted to CalPADS for that entire year. So it's just important to be cognizant of the filters and how they will sort of put a hard stop on the meet records that you're seeing, either because they're contained in their respective academic years. Some of the columns, there's the personals information comes from the student information system, demographics, and SELPA and local record ID come from your special education data system. The meeting info columns come from the meet record. This is the only report in CalPADS where you can verify the parental involvement facilitation code, which is State Performance Plan Indicator 8. I talked about that a little bit earlier in auditing your special education data system, where the feds expect this to be a yes for every response, but it can also be answered with no response, and that will not count against you in this indicator. But this is the only place in CalPADS where you can find what you have reported for the parental involvement facilitation code. It's pulled at the end of the year, but just like transition indicators for indicator 13, you can take the time and fix it now if you're already working on correcting some of these other meetings. But this is the place to identify that going forward, to be sure that you have indicated yes or no response as appropriate. Monitoring report 1624 can be used as a stopgap to monitor your 60-day timelines. And I'll go through this. I'm going to open up the report in a moment and go through it. But you can basically compare the parent consent date to the meeting date and figure out the number of days between in order to find timelines that may not be compliant. You can also use that calculation to find timelines that are elapsing soon, making sure that your case managers, program specialists, or whomever are aware that that timeline is coming up and that they need to make sure that that meeting is held or delay code is reported or however that works out. Just make sure they're aware that the timeline is closing. Okay, let me open up 1614. Again, this is a report that has been anonymized, meaning there's no student person identifying information in this report. So as I stated here, the last column is that parental involvement facilitation. You want to filter that for no's and blanks. And these are records that you might want to do a bit of investigation on, just making sure that these are accurate, because again, these would count against your indicator because it's expected to be all yes. And then for that 60-day timeline calculation, we have the information here necessary to make that calculation. We have, and actually let me zoom in a little bit, sorry about that. We have that initial parent consent date and we have the meeting date. So what we really need is to find the difference between those two. What you might see here are consent dates from like 2015, because that date doesn't really change unless the student is ineligible and reassessed, that sort of thing. So in order to look at data that you'd be accountable for in the current year, you want to sort this newest to oldest. And we're looking at timelines that began and that run from May 1st of the prior year. And that's because if we cut that off at the end of the year, we may miss some of those timelines that either might span the summer break, if that's the case, or otherwise just would not be counted if we didn't expand the window that we're looking at a little bit to account for that. So you want to do that, and you want to make sure that you're filtering the evaluation type just for Part B initials, because that 60-day timeline is only applying to Part B initials. So once you've made that filter, in order to calculate the difference here, I'm going to add a blank column to the right of the meeting date. And to do that, you right-click on the column letter and just click Insert. And that's going to insert a blank column. You can give it a title. We'll call it 60-day. And now you're just going to ask Excel to basically subtract the two numbers. So in order to enter a formula, you start with the equals sign. I'm going to select the meeting date because that's going to be the larger value. And I'm going to subtract from it with a minus sign the consent date. And when I hit enter, this is going to tell me how many days lapsed between those two dates. January 0th, 1900. That looks pretty bizarre. The reason it looks like that, the reason this is formatted in a date format is because Excel said, hey, you're subtracting a couple dates. I'm going to help you out and put this in a date format too. It's not what we're looking for. So you can change this format in the home ribbon under number here. I click on date. The drop down, just choose general. And in this case, since the consent date and the meeting date were the same day, district works fast. We have a 0 here, but you can copy this formula down and it's going to do that calculation for all of these meetings. You can also double click on the bottom right corner of the cell when you just have one selected, and it'll copy the formula all the way down the page. Now we're looking for timelines that exceeded 60 days, and you can put a filter on this column in order to only show those values. So you click on the filter just like you were going to select some values here, but you don't want to have to go through and click on 70, 71, 72. You just want to see the values that are larger than 60. So you can choose the number of filters right above the search box and greater than, and we're just looking for greater than 60. And so when you hit OK, it's going to filter to only show where the timeline was exceeded. And this is where you can look for valid delay codes or pending records to make sure that, to double check that the timeline is compliant based on, even if the 60-day timeline was exceeded, you can look for valid delay codes or pending records that would help explain exceeding that timeline and make the record compliant. And so that is pretty much that for 1624. I don't see any questions in the Q&A currently. Thank you, team, for handling those. I really appreciate your help. If any questions come up on 1624, feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we'll address that. But for now, we'll go back to our regularly scheduled program. Collaboration is critical. I think I've said that 3 or 4 times. It's crucial for CALPADS admins, special education data system coordinators to collaborate to monitor these timelines. Your special education data system coordinators should have the ability to generate 1621 and 1624 reports. I believe the roles that allow that permission are the same roles that allow you to report data from your special education data system. So ideally, if you're the person that is sending data to CALPADS, you can run these reports. I believe that is the case. Make sure all of your transactions have posted from your special education data system. Verify that what is in your special education data system is reflected correctly and accurately in CALPADS. If it doesn't, maybe the data has not fully posted, maybe the transaction was missing a record. That's just something you'll need to investigate. And be sure to add pending as of meet records for those overdue timelines, including a valid delay code. Looking ahead to 2025-2026, degree of support will be required in fall of 2025. Brandy touched on this earlier. Students with disabilities data, including degree of support, in combination with data from the fall 2 reports, will be combined to provide the California State Assignment Accountability System, CalSAS, with data to make determinations about staff assignments. This will affect the CalSAS assignment monitoring cycle in August of 2026. So again, we have this entire academic year up until June 30th of 2025, where degree of support is not required, but we have this opportunity to make sure it is populated for all of the students where it is required. Beginning with fall 1 of 2025, that data will actually be required and validated. So take this time to make sure that your case manager, your IEP teams are going through the documentation and making these determinations, and make sure, because this is not on the IEP pages in SEIS, it's on the CalPADS student record independent of any IEP page. So when the IEP team is making this determination, they need to make sure that that value is indicated on the CalPADS student page before affirming. Right now in SEIS, it's a warning if it's blank and there is a disability code that would require it, but they can still affirm it. So they need to make sure that that value is on the record before affirming. Otherwise, it will not be in the transaction. And then it, of course, would not be posted to CalPADS. But again, this will affect the August 2026 monitoring cycle. The meeting activity plan review indicator. Currently in the meet files, we cannot distinguish between a plan review for Part C or Part B student. So we're proposing modifying the indicator to capture what Part B or C the annual plan review is being held for. Resources and support. Link at the top for the CalPADS Special Education Data Weekly Office Hours. We had a couple of schedule shifts due to roadshows and national holidays and what have you, but we are back on our regular schedule every Monday at 3 o'clock. You can sign up, and if you sign up for one, you can attend them all. You can come and go as you please, drop in, ask questions, chat amongst your peers. I always try to present some information at the beginning that's going to be useful and is relevant and pertinent to what we're working on right now. But yeah, every Monday from 3 to 4:30, come join us. Listen to my dogs bark at the ice cream man or whatever's going on. Aside from that, we have links to the user manual, the file submission scenarios, reporting data for students with disabilities, documentation, all sorts of good stuff. The listserv email, frequently asked questions are all on this page. Outstanding resources. Do we have any additional questions? 11:56. So if there are no further questions, you'll get back 4 minutes of your morning, maybe an early lunch, go beat the rush. Brandy, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, just thank you guys for taking the time to listen to this entire presentation.
Awesome.
We do have a question though, apparently.
Oh, okay. Marcy, we have one overdue due to transferring in without the reeval having been done at the prior district. They started the meeting but won't affirm as the parent hasn't signed yet. What date is best to use for the pending transaction?
It's not.
No?
It's not pending because the meeting occurred.
Oh, if the meeting has occurred, you can, since it's not an initial, the team can affirm without signature if in SEIS at least. I'm not sure if
And
it's that way.
not only can, but they need to.
Yeah.
Right? Because the only way you're going to get a meet record up to CalPADS is if they affirm. You need to change the mentality of your case managers. For reevaluations and plan reviews, they need to affirm after the meeting has been held. It doesn't mean things are finalized. Things are not finalized until the parent signs the IEP, but submitting the meeting information, it will not get done unless your case managers affirm after the meeting has been held.
I hear what you're saying, Marcy. Marcy says it's a losing battle. They still refuse, even though you keep telling them. Talk to your administrator. I'd be happy to come explain it if their case managers want to hop on a Zoom with me. I'll be nice. I promise.
But I mean, what's the alternative?
Right. The alternative is going in and online maintenance, adding these for all of these unsigned, and that's egregious. They should just be following the procedure outlined in SEIS, which is to affirm once it's held. I think they suggest within 2 or 3 days, but I mean as soon as possible, regardless of parent signature.
Yep.
Parent signature doesn't matter when it comes to whether or not the meeting was held. They're not signing to say they went to a meeting. That just happened. You're reporting that a meeting occurred. So I feel your pain on that, Marcy. Reach out if we can help. Maria asks, the meeting has not been held and is late. Can we backdate the pending record with the delay code? You can. I don't believe it's necessary based on the annual determination letter, at least, because we'll find that pending record even if it was submitted after the due date.
Well, not after December 13th.
Right.
But on or prior, after census day, but before on or before December 13th.
Yeah, after the timeline is expired, but before December 13th. Yes. Okay. And Heather, What if the meeting has been held, but they're going to have an additional meeting? It should still be affirmed and reported. Even if you're going to have continuation meetings, further discussions going on down the road. In SEIS, for example, you would affirm that meeting, and then the additional meetings can be recorded using the amendment feature. As adjustments are made to the plan through discussion with the IEP team and the parent and all that sort of thing. You just want to report that you've held the meeting and the IEP team met even without conclusion. And the understanding that there will be additional meetings, you still want to report and record that that meeting was held, especially when it comes, very particularly for timeline compliance purposes. Okay, you are welcome. Thank you very much for attending, but thank you all so much.
Thank you. Great job, Dominic.
Thanks, Brandy. You as well.
Bye, guys.
All right, everybody. Have a great one. Have a great weekend.